The entire internet knew that the Clevelands had finally found their long-lost biological son. What the internet didn't know was that this long-lost heir had already rejected their invitations to return home 3 times. The first time, I told them I was studying for finals. The second time, my hamster was giving birth, and I couldn't possibly leave her. The third time, Mercury was in retrograde, and it felt like bad energy to travel. By the 4th time, the Clevelands decided they had had enough. They sent their private driver to ambush me right outside my university gates. I stared at the sleek, black Cadillac Escalade idling at the curb, let out a slow sigh, and muttered to myself, well, since you're already here, I guess I'll go. When I stepped through the grand double doors of the Cleveland estate, a young man in a crisp white linen shirt was sitting on the velvet sofa in the main parlor. The moment his eyes locked onto me, they welled up with tears. "Kit, you're finally home," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Did you stay away so long because you hate me?" The Cleveland patriarch, Edward, immediately handed him a tissue with a pained expression, shooting me a look of deep resentment. My biological older sister, Victoria, didn't bother sugarcoating it. "You staying away like that made Ollie feel guilty every single day. Doesn't your conscience bother you at all?" Then there was the girl the Clevelands had arranged for me to marry, Amelia Bancroft. She was even more dramatic. "Mr. Cleveland," she said, her voice cold and aloof. "Ollie and I grew up together. You should think carefully about this engagement. Don't make things difficult for him." They all looked at me with varying degrees of hostility. I scanned the room, found the deepest, softest armchair, sat down, and pulled out my phone to summon an Uber Black. "Calling off the wedding, then?" "Works for me." "I agree." I tapped the screen. "If that's all, I'll be heading back." "Christopher, have you forgotten even the most basic manners?" Victoria pushed her gold-rimmed glasses up the bridge of her nose, her voice as flat and clinical as someone reading the morning stock market report. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her hands on the table. She just stared at me with that patronizing, pitying look wealthy adults save for misbehaving children. "Ollie sat in this room and waited for you for 4 hours. He prepared this entire welcome dinner for you." She sighed, her eyes narrowing. "You haven't even had a sip of water, and you throw a tantrum about calling off the engagement before walking out. Is this how the Edwans raised you, or do you honestly think throwing a fit will make us feel guilty?" I glanced down at my phone screen. Driver is 1.5 miles away. I let out a quiet sigh. "Miss Cleveland, my name is Kid Edwin." I raised my eyes to meet hers. "And I only agreed to call off the wedding because Ms. Bancroft here just told me to think carefully. I've always been good at taking advice. Since she doesn't want this arrangement, I see no reason to force myself onto her. Isn't this a win-win for everyone?" Amelia's brow furrowed slightly. She was transitionally beautiful, pale, cool, and distant, like a marble statue of some ancient goddess. Even her frown carried a sense of effortless superiority. "Christopher," she said, taking a step toward me. Her tone was gentle, but it carried the weight of an unspoken threat. "I know you've spent years away from high society, and you probably feel bitter. But marriage isn't a game. What I said just now was simply because I don't want you taking your frustrations out on Ollie. He has a weak heart, he can't handle stress." She paused, her voice softening into a rehearsed display of empathy. "If you felt my attitude was harsh, I apologize. But don't use breaking our engagement as a cheap chip to threaten your family." What a masterful display of high society diplomacy. With a few sentences, she painted herself as the noble protector of the weak, while pinning the label of ungrateful, dramatic child squarely on my chest. Oliver's tears flowed even faster now. He clutched the sleeve of Julia, the Cleveland matriarch, his voice trembling like a leaf in an autumn gale. "Mom, please don't blame Kit." He choked back a sob. "He went through so much out there. It's only natural he resents me. If my being here makes him this miserable, then I'll pack my bags and leave tomorrow." As he spoke, his body swayed precariously, as if he might collapse right there on the Persian rug. Julia let out a sharp gasp and wrapped her arms around him. "What are you saying, sweetheart? This is your home. Where on earth would you go?" Once she finished comforting Oliver, she turned her gaze back to me. The warmth in her eyes instantly froze into jagged shards of disappointment. "Christopher, must you tear this family apart before you're satisfied?" Julia's voice was quiet, but every word felt like a deliberate blow. "Ollie personally decorated your room. He even gave up his favorite wing of the estate for you. And the minute you walk through the door, you pierce his heart by threatening to break the engagement. Do you have any idea how many nights he's cried himself to sleep, feeling like he stole your life?" I watched this performance of maternal devotion in silence. It was almost beautiful, in a tragic way. If I were indeed a fragile, broken boy who had spent 16 years suffering in a rural town, desperately starving for a mother's touch, this subtle knife would have cut me to ribbons. I would be on my knees, weeping and begging for forgiveness. But I wasn't that boy. My adoptive mother, Catherine Edwin, had given me a piece of advice before I left. "Kit, when you're dealing with idiots who don't speak your language, never try to explain yourself. Explaining yourself is giving them power." So, I tapped my phone screen and canceled the Uber. "Since Mrs. Cleveland thinks I'm just throwing a tantrum," I said, leaning back into the plush leather of the armchair, crossing my hands over my knee. Then let's do this, Ms. Bancroft. I looked directly at Amelia, a flawless, polite smile curving my lips. Call your family lawyer right now. Have them draw up a formal termination of the engagement. You sign it, I sign it. Tomorrow morning, we'll run a notice in the papers stating that Christopher Cleveland is unrefined, unfit for the Bancroft family pedigree, and that you, Amelia Bancroft, have formally rejected me. That way, you preserve your family's pristine reputation, and you get to fulfill your childhood sweetheart dream with Ollie. It's perfect. I won't even ask for a termination fee. Consider it my wedding gift to the two of you. The air in the parlor turned to ice. Victoria's perpetually composed face finally cracked. Amelia's eyes went utterly cold. They had clearly never dealt with someone who refused to play by their rules. In their minds, I was supposed to either scream and shout or beg for their acceptance. They hadn't expected me to sit across from them like a cold-blooded corporate executive, casually offering them the most logical exit strategy. What kind of foolish game is this? Victoria walked over, standing over me, her voice taking on the sharp edge of an older sister trying to enforce discipline. This engagement was arranged by our grandfather. Do you honestly think you can dissolve it with a wave of your hand? If you actually want to be a part of this family, go upstairs, wash up, put on some decent clothes, and come down for dinner. Stop trying to test our patience with these cheap, manipulative parlor tricks. Oliver gently tugged on Victoria's sleeve, his eyes red and watery. Tori, don't be so hard on Kit. He's probably just exhausted. He turned to me, his gaze dripping with a sickeningly sweet tenderness. Kit, dinner is going to get cold. Please, come eat something. We can talk about the engagement some other time. I looked at his hopelessly innocent face. What a perfect golden bridge he was offering me. If I stepped onto it, I would become the forgiven sinner, the unruly child who threw a fit and was graciously tolerated. And from that moment on, I would always be beneath him in this house. I stood up, smoothing the front of my white shirt, the one they clearly deemed cheap. Sure, I said, looking at Oliver. Since my little brother is practically begging me, let's have dinner. I wanted to see exactly what kind of game they were playing at the dinner table. But, I paused at the entrance of the dining room, looking back at Amelia. I suggest you get that paperwork ready as soon as possible, Miss Bancroft. The Cleveland dining room was massive, illuminated by a crystal chandelier that cast a blinding, sterile glow over everything. The long mahogany table was piled high with exquisite dishes. I was placed at the very far end of the table, the maximum distance from Julia and Victoria, but in a spot where I had a perfect, unobstructed view of them piling food onto Oliver's plate. Kit, the chef, made this special wild mushroom and white truffle soup. It's incredibly restorative. Oliver personally spooned some soup into a bowl and nodded for the maid to place it in front of me. He offered me a warm, saintly smile. I'm sure you didn't get to have things like this while you were away. Drink up, it's wonderful for your health. The steam rose from the bowl, carrying a delicate, earthy aroma. I looked down. Floating near the bottom of the broth were tiny, almost imperceptible flecks of crushed peanuts. This body had a severe peanut allergy. Even a trace amount would trigger anaphylaxis and send me into respiratory failure. It wasn't a secret. Before they brought me back, the Cleveland's family attorney had run a comprehensive background check, and my medical records had been forwarded directly to their inbox. I didn't pick up my spoon. I just stared at the bowl. Why aren't you eating? Julia elegantly sliced her filet mignon, not even bothering to look up. Ollie had those truffles flown in specially from Italy. He barely kept any for himself so you could have them. I suppose growing up in the wild makes it hard to appreciate decent food. Victoria raised her wine glass, taking a slow sip. Her voice was flat. Christopher, this is the Cleveland estate, not whatever rural town you came from. Learn to accept kindness when it's offered to you. And lose the defensive attitude. Nobody here is trying to hurt you. I raised my eyes, locking onto Victoria's, eyes that pretended to be rational but were completely blinded by prejudice. Is that so? I smiled, sliding the bowl toward the center of the table. Since Ollie is so concerned about my health, maybe he should take the first sip. Show me how it's done. Oliver's face stiffened. He obviously hadn't expected me to call his bluff so publicly. Kit, I had this made specifically for you. He bit his lip, tears once again welling in his eyes. Did I do something wrong? Why do you always treat me like an enemy? That's enough. Amelia slammed her fork down onto her plate, unable to watch any longer. Christopher, you are being incredibly malicious. She looked at me as if I were a lost cause, an unruly animal. Ollie has been weak lately, and he's exhausted himself trying to prepare for your arrival. Instead of showing an ounce of gratitude, you sit there throwing cheap, bitter barbs. What is it that you actually want? I leaned back in my chair, observing the self-righteous jury sitting before me. No screaming. No hysterical shouting. They used their high-class education and refined manners to deliver the most vicious, cutting remarks. This was the polite cruelty of the ultra-wealthy. I stood up, picked up the bowl of soup, and walked straight over to Oliver. I'm not eating it because I am severely allergic to peanuts. I watched Oliver's pupils contract in sudden panic. My voice remained soft, as if I were reading a bedtime story. Page 2, line 3 of the medical report your lawyer handed you. It's written in bold. If my dear brother was so incredibly thoughtful in planning this welcome dinner, how did he manage to forget something that could literally kill me? Julia's knife scraped sharply against her plate and stopped. Victoria's brow furrowed deep. She turned her cold gaze toward the butler standing near the sideboard. Cold sweat beaded on the butler's forehead. Madam. Miss Cleveland, the report did mention it. I briefed you on the medical files yesterday morning. Julia's face flushed a blotchy red and then went pale. Yesterday morning, her mind had been entirely occupied with soothing a weeping Oliver. She hadn't had a single second to spare for the medical file of a boy from the country. Kit, I swear I didn't know. Oliver scrambled out of his chair, tears streaming down his face. The kitchen always uses peanut oil or peanut garnishes for this broth. I really didn't know. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. He wept so pitifully, you would have thought he was the one who had almost been poisoned. Amelia immediately stepped between us, shielding him, glaring at me with raw fury. Christopher. It was an honest mistake. Ollie didn't do it on purpose. Must you use every single opportunity to act like a victim just to make everyone feel guilty? Do you have any idea how petty and small-minded this makes you look? I couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was truly brilliant. I, the person who had almost been sent to the ER, hadn't even raised my voice, yet they had already painted me as the bitter, small-minded villain. Ms. Bancroft is entirely correct. I nodded, gently setting the bowl down in front of Amelia. An honest mistake. Since Ollie didn't mean it, and you care so deeply about him, why don't you drink it, Ms. Bancroft? After all, it would be a terrible sin to waste truffles flown all the way from Italy, wouldn't it? Amelia stared at the soup, her face turning an ugly shade of gray. Of course she wouldn't touch it. She wasn't allergic, but she was an extreme germaphobe. She would never eat something that had been pushed around and handled by someone else. I watched their frozen expressions, my smile widening. What? Nobody wants it? I pulled a linen napkin from the table and slowly wiped my hands. It seems the Cleveland family's kindness is a little hard to swallow. I'm full. Enjoy your dinner, everyone. I turned and walked toward the grand staircase, not offering them a single backward glance. Victoria's cold voice cut through the silence behind me. Christopher, tomorrow evening, Lord Bancroft wants to see you at the family estate. You had better lose this prickly, defensive attitude of yours. If you ruin tomorrow's dinner, you won't even have the right to step foot in this house again. I didn't stop. I just gave a casual wave of my hand. Understood. Oh, and a quick reminder, MS. Cleveland, stop trying to threaten me with throwing me out. I haven't deleted my Uber app yet. The room Oliver had prepared for me was located on the far east wing of the third floor. The moment I opened the door, a heavy cloud of expensive men's cologne hit me like a wall. The room was massive, decorated in an aggressively masculine, high-tech style, essentially a giant gaming suite. On the nightstand sat a polished crystal picture frame containing a photo of Oliver and Amelia laughing together on a beach. On the mahogany desk sat Oliver's old customized gaming keyboard and mouse. Inside the wardrobe, a few of his lightly worn designer jackets were still hanging. This wasn't a room prepared for a returning son. It was a territory marked. Every square inch was designed to scream, every corner of this house belongs to him. Even the place where I slept was meant to exist under his shadow. Kit. Do you like it? I hadn't heard Oliver walk up. He stood in the doorway, looking fragile and tentative. These were some of my favorite things. I wanted you to have them. He watched me, a faint, hidden spark in his eyes, a quiet hope that I would lose my temper. I walked over to the bed, picked up the crystal frame, and studied the photo for a moment. I love it, I said, turning to him with a warm, genuine smile. You're so thoughtful, Ollie. You even anticipated that I might have nightmares sleeping in a strange bed. With Miss Bancroft's face guarding the room like a gargoyle, I'm sure no evil spirits would dare come near me. Oliver's polite smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He clearly hadn't expected me to deflect his little jab so easily. You have a unique sense of humor, Kit, he murmured, his lips twitching. Get some rest. We have to see Grandfather Bancroft tomorrow. Left with nowhere to direct his frustration, he turned and walked away, looking thoroughly unsatisfied. I shut the door and flipped the picture frame face down on the desk. The following afternoon, the Cleveland family's personal stylist arrived early at the mansion. Oliver emerged in a bespoke, ivory white suit, looking like a pristine lily. Julia and Victoria showered him with praise in the foyer. You look absolutely beautiful, Ollie. Lord Bancroft will adore you. Julia's eyes shone with maternal pride, as though Oliver were the only child she had ever birthed. Then, I walked down the stairs wearing my old gray hoodie and jeans. The laughter in the foyer died instantly. Victoria squinted at me, her eyes filled with unshielded disgust. You plan on showing up to the Bancroft estate looking like that? Her tone was dripping with disdain. Tonight is Lord Bancroft's 80th birthday gala. The most influential families in the city will be there. Dressing like a vagrant is a direct insult to us. Do you want to make the Clevelands a laughingstock? Oliver quickly stepped forward, grabbing my arm. Kit, don't be mad at Tori, she's just worried about you. I know you probably didn't have access to nice clothes back in the country, and real suits can feel restrictive. I had the stylist alter one of my old suits for you. He signaled a maid, who brought forward a garment bag. The fabric is incredibly soft. You'll look amazing in it. The maid unzipped the bag to reveal a navy blue suit. It was a style from last season, and it had clearly been tailored down to a size that was far too small. I estimated the shoulder width. If I forced myself into it, I wouldn't even be able to lift my arms, let alone move comfortably at a formal dinner. This was his thoughtfulness. Force me into a dated, ill-fitting hand-me-down to permanently cement my status as the poor country relative in front of the city's elite. Go ahead and try it on, Kit, Oliver urged, his eyes wide and innocent. We're running late. Amelia's car is already waiting outside. Julia chimed in, her voice sharp with impatience. Go change, Christopher. Stop keeping your elders waiting. The Cleveland name is not a toy for you to play your stubborn games with. I looked down at the navy blue suit in my hands. I didn't get angry. I didn't throw it on the floor. I simply looked at Oliver. Are you absolutely sure you want me to wear this, Ollie? Of course, Oliver smiled, his voice sweet as honey. It's one of my absolute favorites. All right. I nodded, turning toward the dressing room. 15 minutes later, I pushed the dressing room door open. The foyer fell into a dead, suffocating silence once again. I wasn't wearing the navy blue suit. I was still wearing my own white shirt and dark trousers. However, I had rolled the sleeves up to my elbows, revealing lean, defined forearms. Around my left wrist, a simple black braided cord was loosely tied. Christopher. Victoria finally snapped, her voice rising to an uncharacteristic pitch. What is wrong with you? We told you to change. I walked over unhurriedly and tossed the navy blue suit onto the velvet sofa. A sharp rip echoed through the room. The suit, which had already been altered to a microscopic size, split wide open at the shoulder seam from the sheer force of the casual throw. Oh, I am so sorry, I said, looking at Oliver's suddenly pale face, my tone dripping with mock apology. The quality of your clothes doesn't seem very good, Ollie. I barely dug my arms into the sleeves, and it tore right open. I figured, if my suit split open in the middle of Lord Bancroft's gala. Well, I don't think the Cleveland family's dignity would ever recover from that, would it? Julia trembled with rage, pointing a finger at me but unable to find the words. You are utterly impossible. Victoria took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing down her disgust. We don't have time for this. She cast a freezing look at me. If you insist on going out there and embarrassing yourself, fine. But once we arrive at the Bancroft estate, you stay behind Ollie. Do not speak unless spoken to. I shrugged indifferently. Stay behind him? Not a chance. I was going to have a front row seat for the show. The Bancroft estate sat on a sprawling hill on the outskirts of the city, designed like a grand English manor. Lord Bancroft's 80th birthday gala was an incredibly lavish affair. Sleek sports cars and luxury sedans lined the winding driveway, and the grand ballroom was filled with the glittering elite of high society, draped in silks and diamonds. When I followed the Clevelands into the hall, nearly every eye in the room turned toward us. In a sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer evening gowns, my rolled-up white shirt and dark trousers stood out like a stray dog at a dog show. Who is that? Why is he dressed like he's going to a casual brunch? I think that's the biological son the Clevelands just brought back. Good Lord, you can take the boy out of the country, he doesn't even know basic etiquette. Look at Oliver, so refined. That's what real breeding looks like. The whispers drifted through the air like a rising tide. Oliver walked slightly ahead of me, his arm wrapped around Amelia's. He kept his head lowered, looking deeply pained by the whispers, but his grip on Amelia's arm tightened. Amelia patted his hand soothingly, casting a sharp, warning glare back at me. Julia and Victoria accelerated their pace, putting a noticeable distance between themselves and me, as if walking near me were an embarrassment they couldn't bear. I followed at a leisurely pace, completely ignoring the judgmental stares. Edward, Julia, congratulations, a wealthy middle-aged woman smiled as she approached. It was Amelia's mother, Mrs. Bancroft. And this must be your eldest? Her eyes swept over me, and her brow twitched with immediate distaste. She was a woman who lived and died by appearances. My outfit was a direct affront to her standards. Yes, Christopher has been away for a long time. His manners are still rustic, Victoria offered smoothly. She didn't bother defending me, instead, she distanced herself with cold efficiency. He'll learn, Mrs. Bancroft said dismissively, turning to lead us toward the head table. Lord Bancroft sat at the center of the table, slowly turning a set of heavy jade worry stones in his hand. The Cleveland boy is back, the old man boomed, his eyes sharp. Now that you're back, you'll need to learn how things are done in our world. The engagement between you and Amelia was arranged by your grandfather and me decades ago. But love cannot be forced. The old man set the stones down, looking at Amelia and Oliver. Amelia and Oliver grew up together. They share a deep bond. You've just arrived, and you don't understand our ways. Forcing this marriage would only make everyone miserable. He spoke with the calm, unassailable authority of a patriarch. So, tonight, while our closest friends are gathered, we are officially dissolving the engagement. Of course, the Bancrofts will not leave you empty-handed. We are developing a new high-end waterfront plaza downtown. We will allow the Clevelands a 10% equity stake. Consider it compensation. The grand hall fell into a hush. Everyone leaned in, eager to watch the drama of an elite rejection unfold. A 10% stake in a prime development to buy off a country boy's dreams. To them, it was an incredibly generous act of charity. Julia and Victoria exchanged a quick glance, a flash of pure greed igniting in their eyes. The Clevelands had been trying to get a piece of that waterfront project for months without success. Now, they got to solve the awkward engagement problem and walk away with a massive financial windfall. Lord Bancroft is entirely right, Julia spoke up quickly. Christopher, well, he simply doesn't have the refinement for Amelia. This is truly what's best for both children. Oliver looked up at Amelia, his eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. Thank you, Grandfather Bancroft. Amelia looked down at me with a cold, superior pity. Christopher, do you understand? My grandfather has given you the best possible outcome. You don't have to struggle to fit into a world where you don't belong, and you've secured a massive deal for your family. You should be grateful. Grateful? I nearly laughed out loud. They were selling my dignity to line the Cleveland pockets, and I was expected to thank them for it. I could hear the gears of their greed grinding from a mile away. I looked at Lord Bancroft, then at the Cleveland family standing beside him. A wave of absolute disgust washed over me. Lord Bancroft, I said, stepping forward, looking the old patriarch dead in the eye. I agreed to call off the engagement yesterday. But I have one condition. Lord Bancroft's brow furrowed deep. A condition? What right do you have to demand conditions? A 10% stake is an astronomical sum for someone like you. Young man, do not let greed blind you. Greed? I let out a cold laugh. You misunderstand, Lord Bancroft. My condition has nothing to do with money. My condition is that the public announcement of this dissolution must state the truth. I turned to face the entire room of watching guests, my voice ringing out clear and undeniable. It must state that Amelia Bancroft is unfaithful, having carried on an illicit affair with Oliver Cleveland behind my back before the wedding could even take place. And that I, Kit Edwin, broke off the engagement because she is too dirty for my tastes. The room erupted into a frenzy of shocked gasps. Amelia's face turned a violent shade of red. Christopher. How dare you? Oliver let out a sob, covering his face. Kit, how could you lie about us like this? Julia, trembling with pure rage, raised her hand and swung it toward my face. You ungrateful little bastard. I'll teach you some respect. I didn't flinch. I didn't move to block her. But just as her hand was about to strike my cheek, the massive mahogany double doors of the ballroom were slammed open. Touch him, and I'll ruin you, a cold, commanding voice echoed through the hall, cutting through the chaos like a knife through ice. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Standing in the doorway was a tall, elegant woman draped in a tailored black wool coat. Her features were striking, her eyes cold as winter. The guests, who had just been enjoying the drama, collectively gasped as they recognized her face. It was the woman who sat at the absolute peak of the country's financial empire, the head of the Edwin conglomerate, Helena Edwin. Julia's hand froze 2 inches from my cheek. It wasn't because she had found some belated shred of maternal conscience. It was because the air behind her had turned to absolute zero. The grand ballroom, which only seconds before had been buzzing with the predatory delight of high society watching an outsider get put in his place, fell into a silence so profound you could hear the carbonation dying in the champagne flutes. Helena Edwin did not rush. She didn't shout. She simply walked across the Italian marble floor, her tailored black coat billowing slightly with each measured stride. Behind her stood 4 men in charcoal suits, each carrying leather portfolios with the kind of relaxed posture that belonged exclusively to corporate apex predators and high-grade private security. Lord Bancroft's jade worry stone slipped from his hand, hitting the table with a dull, hollow thud. MS. Ms. Edwin? Edward Cleveland's voice cracked. He practically shoved Oliver aside as he scrambled to his feet, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo with trembling fingers. What an extraordinary honor. We had no idea you were in the city, let alone attending. Helena didn't spare him a glance. She didn't even blink in his direction. She walked straight past the patriarchs, past the frozen waitstaff, and stopped precisely between Julia and me. She looked down at Julia's raised hand with a cool, clinical curiosity, as if examining a dead insect on a windowpane. Were you about to strike my nephew, Mrs. Cleveland? Helena's voice was velvet, laid over tempered steel. Julia's hand dropped like a severed cable. Her face drained of all color, the flush of self-righteous rage vanishing beneath a layer of pale sweat. Your nephew? Ms. Edwin, there must be a misunderstanding. This is Christopher. He is our biological son, just brought back from the countryside. His name is Kit Edwin, Helena interrupted, her tone flat and devoid of inflection. And the only misunderstanding in this room is the delusion that you people have any claim over him. She turned to face me. The icy detachment in her eyes melted instantly, replaced by an affectionate, exasperated warmth. I told Catherine you'd let them drag you into some second-rate circus, Helena sighed, reaching out to gently adjust the collar of my rolled-up white shirt. Look at you. 2 days away from home and you're already standing in a room full of vultures. I told you, Aunt Helena, I smiled slightly, leaning in so only she could hear. I was bored. And my Uber was taking too long anyway. Smart mouth, she muttered affectionately. The room remained utterly paralyzed. Amelia Bancroft looked back and forth between Helena and me, her perfectly constructed porcelain composure splintering down the center. Kit. Edwin? But that's impossible. The Edwin family. Catherine Edwin is my adoptive mother, I said, turning to Amelia with that same polite, empty smile I'd worn all evening. Helena is my aunt. Did your comprehensive background check miss that part, Miss Bancroft? Or did your private investigators stop reading after they saw the word orphanage on the registration sheet from 16 years ago? The truth fell like a guillotine. The Edwin group wasn't just a prominent family, they were the apex of continental commerce. They held the infrastructure contracts, the maritime shipping lines, the sovereign wealth allocations, and the venture capital debt that kept half the families in this ballroom solvent. The Clevelands were wealthy, yes, in the way that local barons were wealthy. The Edwins were the sovereign state. Victoria pushed her glasses up her nose, her hands shaking so violently the gold frames caught the chandelier light in erratic flashes. Wait. If you were with the Edwins, why did you live in that provincial town? Why did the records say you were attending a public university on a scholarship? Because, I said, looking at Victoria like one might look at a particularly slow toddler, I like quiet towns. I like riding my bicycle to class. And I earned that scholarship with my own test scores. Unlike Ollie here, who required a $5 million endowment from Edward to get onto the waitlist for a liberal arts degree. Oliver's breath hitched. He shrank behind Julia, his pristine ivory suit suddenly looking absurdly gaudy, like a costume rented for a play that had just been cancelled. Lord Bancroft finally found his voice, though it had lost all of its booming authority. He pushed himself up from his chair, leaning heavily on the table. Ms. Edwin. Helena, the old man stammered, attempting to recover the dignity he had spent 80 years cultivating. This is a family matter. A private arrangement between the Bancrofts and the Clevelands regarding our long-standing engagement. Christopher, Kit, was merely being informed of our decision to reallocate the marriage to Oliver to ensure family harmony. We even offered a 10% equity stake in the New Harbor waterfront plaza as compensation. Compensation? Helena turned her head slowly, looking at Lord Bancroft with genuine amusement. She snapped her fingers once. Her chief legal counsel, a man with silver hair and a razor-thin briefcase, stepped forward and opened a slate-gray folder. The New Harbor waterfront plaza, Helena began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the dead-silent hall, is built on reclaimed coastal land under a 99-year commercial lease. That lease is held by Edwin Maritime Infrastructure. The development loans financing 85% of the construction were underwritten by Edwin Capital. She paused, taking a step toward the Bancroft head table. Lord Bancroft, you are offering my nephew a 10% stake in a project whose master deed currently sits in my basement vault. You are offering him crumbs from a loaf of bread that he holds the receipt for. Lord Bancroft's face turned an alarming shade of plum. His throat moved, but only a dry, whistling sound came out. Furthermore, Helena continued, looking over at Edward and Julia, I believe the Cleveland Group recently applied for a $300 million bridge loan to cover the supply chain shortfalls in your logistics division. You were counting on the Bancroft merger to secure our syndicate's approval. Edward Cleveland looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grip the edge of the linen table to keep from collapsing. Ms. Edwin, please. We didn't know. If we had known Christopher was under your care. If you had known, what? I cut in, stepping forward. The polite mask was gone. I looked at Edward, then at Julia, and finally at Victoria. If you had known I was an Edwin, you wouldn't have put peanuts in my soup. If you had known I had billions behind my name, you wouldn't have handed me an altered, torn suit from your favorite son's closet. If you had known, you wouldn't have treated me like a stray mongrel begging for scraps at your table. Victoria flinched as if slapped. Kit, that's not, we were trying to integrate you into the family. We thought you needed discipline. You didn't want a son, I said coldly. You wanted a prop. You wanted a Pathetic, grateful little rustic boy whom Oliver could magnanimously forgive and overshadow. You wanted someone so broken by your coldness that he would grovel for a single crumb of your approval. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the simple black braided cord around my wrist, and untied it. Beneath it was a sleek, stainless steel USB drive. I tossed it onto the center of the head table. It landed right next to Lord Bancroft's jade stones. What is that? Amelia asked, her voice trembling. That, I said, contains the private server logs from the Grand Hyatt suite. Oliver booked every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 6 months under his personal credit card, along with the valet records of your Porsche parked in the underground garage. Amelia gasped, taking a sharp step back from Oliver. Oliver's knees finally gave out entirely. He collapsed onto the carpet, tears streaming down his face, this time completely unchoreographed. Kit, please. No, don't. You told me yesterday that breaking our engagement was a matter of high society diplomacy, I said, looking down at Amelia. You said I was using it as a cheap chip to threaten my family. Well, Ms. Bancroft, the file has already been sent to every major media outlet in the city. By midnight, your pristine pedigree will be the laughingstock of the entire country. You ruined me. Amelia shrieked, her aristocratic mask completely shattering into raw hysteria. We are the Bancrofts. You can't do this to us. I'm not doing anything to you, I said softly, turning my back on her. I'm just agreeing to call off the wedding. Like you asked. Helena smiled, a breathtaking, lethal sight. She looked at her counsel. Terminate the New Harbor lease immediately. Call the syndicate and freeze all credit lines extended to the Cleveland and Bancroft accounts pending full forensic audit. And let the municipal board know that the Edwans Foundation is pulling all sponsorship from the Bancroft Arts Pavilion. Yes, Ms. Edwans, the lawyer replied, already tapping away on a tablet. Lord Bancroft clutched his chest with a ragged groan, sinking deep into his armchair as his daughter and wife rushed toward him with panic in their eyes. The room descended into pure, unadulterated chaos, screaming socialites, frantic phone calls, and the sound of a century of inherited privilege collapsing under its own weight. Kit. Julia lunged forward, trying to grab my arm, her eyes wild with terror. Kit, wait. You're my baby. You're my flesh and blood. You can't leave us like this. Helena's security detail stepped forward in a unified wall of slate and muscle, blocking Julia before she could come within 5 feet of me. I looked at Julia over the guard's shoulder. My adoptive mother once told me, I said, my voice clear over the din of the room, that blood only makes you related. Loyalty and respect make you family. You didn't even know my allergies, Mrs. Cleveland. Don't pretend you know my name. I turned to Helena. Let's go. This room smells like cheap truffles. Helena let out a sharp, genuine laugh. God, you sound just like your mother. We walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, flanked by security, under the terrified, reverent gazes of the city's highest elite. Behind us, the sounds of Edward screaming at Oliver and Amelia weeping hysterically faded into the background noise of a world we had already left behind. The next 48 hours in the city were nothing short of a bloodbath. The public didn't just receive the news, they devoured it. The leaked surveillance footage and hotel booking records of Oliver Cleveland and Amelia Bancroft had hit the internet with the force of an orbital strike. The narrative of the noble high society sweethearts disintegrated into a tawdry tale of deceit, hypocrisy, and unbridled greed. By morning, the Bancroft family stock had plummeted by 28%. By afternoon, following Helena Edwans' official press release announcing the immediate foreclosure of the New Harbor waterfront lease, trading on Bancroft Holdings was halted by the exchange to prevent total liquidation. I spent that morning on the sunlit terrace of the Edwans estate on the north coast, sipping a cup of black coffee while reviewing my university thesis draft. The terrace overlooked a private cove where the Atlantic surf broke against ancient granite cliffs. The silence was broken by the sound of gravel crunching under tires. Catherine Edwans, my adoptive mother, walked out onto the terrace carrying a plate of warm almond croissants. She was dressed in a simple beige cashmere sweater, her dark hair pinned up loosely with an ivory clip. Unlike Helena's sharp military elegance, Catherine possessed the serene, unshakable calm of a deep ocean. You made quite a mess, Kit, Catherine said, setting the plate down and taking a seat across from me. They brought the mud, Mom, I said, not looking up from my laptop. I just turned on the hose. Helena told me Edward Cleveland called her office 34 times before sunrise. Catherine took a sip of her tea. He even tried to send his lawyers to the gates here. Did they make it past security? Security told them the estate was currently closed for hamster sitting. Catherine replied with a faint, dry smirk. I chuckled. A very legitimate reason. A shadow fell over the doorway of the terrace. Helena stepped out, wearing a sharp cream suit, holding a leather-bound tablet. The Cleveland Board of Directors just held an emergency session, Helena announced, tossing the tablet onto the glass table. Edward has been stripped of his CEO title. The institutional investors are demanding an immediate debt-to-equity swap to keep the logistics arm from entering involuntary bankruptcy. And Victoria? I asked. Victoria's corporate consulting firm relied on two major retainers, the Bancroft Family Trust and our private equity branch. We terminated ours at 8 a.m. Bancroft canceled theirs at 8:15 a.m. because they're currently liquidating their legal funds. Her firm is effectively dead in the water. I scrolled through the tablet. The headlines were brutal. Bancroft patriarch hospitalized following fraud and lease revocation. Cleveland Logistics faces insolvency as Edwans syndicate withdraws credit. The truth behind the country heir, the Edwans scion who humbled high society. What about Oliver? I asked. He tried to do a live stream last night, Helena said, sitting down and taking a croissant. Sat in front of the camera with teary eyes, talking about how he was victimized by high society expectations and how his weak heart couldn't take the cyberbullying. And someone in the comments leaked his medical records from 3 months ago. The ones showing his heart function is completely normal, along with his personal trainer's logs showing he was deadlifting 300 pounds twice a week. Helena shook her head with mild disgust. The boy is an amateur. He doesn't even know how to forge a medical paper properly. I leaned back in my chair, looking out over the ocean. It was almost comical how quickly their grand facade had collapsed. For years, they had lived inside an echo chamber of their own manufactured prestige, convinced that their wealth made them untouchable and their refined manners made them superior. They had treated people like chess pieces, arranging marriages, discarding biological children, and framing their cruelty as diplomacy. The moment someone refused to play by their rules, the entire house of cards fell to dust. Kit, Catherine said softly, her eyes studying my face. Do you want to see them again? See them? I raised an eyebrow. Why would I? Because Edward and Julia are currently parked at the bottom of the private drive, Helena said, glancing at her phone. They've been standing outside their car for 2 hours. Edward looks like he hasn't slept in 3 days, and Julia is carrying some sort of vintage photo album. I stared at my coffee for a moment. Then, I closed my laptop. Let them up, I said. Helena looked at me, a sharp edge entering her gaze. You don't have to entertain their begging, Kit. One word from me and private security will have them escorted across the county line. I know, I said, standing up. But some doors need to be locked from the outside. If I don't give them the key to their own misery, they'll spend the next 10 years convincing themselves that this was all just a misunderstanding. Edward and Julia Cleveland did not look like the refined aristocrats who had looked down their noses at me 48 hours ago. Edward's bespoke suit was rumpled, his tie slightly askew, and deep, purple bruises of exhaustion hung beneath his bloodshot eyes. Julia's makeup had been hurriedly applied, failing to conceal the blotchy redness of her cheeks. Her hands trembled constantly, clutching a worn velvet photo album against her chest. Like a shield. When the butler escorted them into the grand glass-walled reception parlor of the Edwans estate, they froze. The room was vast, understated, and terrifyingly opulent, not with the gaudy crystal chandeliers of the Cleveland mansion, but with original modernist paintings, minimalist limestone floors, and a sweeping panoramic view of the Atlantic coast. I was sitting on a low leather sofa, dressed in my usual dark trousers and a simple crewneck sweater. Catherine sat beside me, slowly turning the pages of an architectural journal, completely ignoring their arrival. Christopher. Julia whispered, taking a desperate, stumbling step forward. My boy. His name is Kit, Catherine said without looking up from her magazine. Her tone wasn't angry, it was simply absolute. Julia stopped as if hit by an electric fence. She looked at Catherine, her eyes wide with a mixture of resentment and terror. Mrs. Edwans. Catherine, Edward began, bowing his head in an awkward, humiliated gesture. We know we made mistakes. We were blinded. We didn't understand the circumstances under which Kit had grown up. We thought we were doing what was best for the family's stability. Stability? I let out a soft, dry laugh. You were selling an engagement to secure a 10% equity cut from a dying commercial plaza. Is that what you call stability? Kit, please. Julia broke down, dropping to her knees right there on the polished limestone. Edward looked horrified by his wife's loss of composure, but he didn't stop her. Desperation had stripped them of their pride. Julia opened the velvet album on the floor, her tears splashing onto the plastic. Protective sleeves. Look at this, Kit. Look. These are the photos from when you were a baby. Before the kidnapping. Before the hospital mixed up the records. I kept your nursery untouched for 5 years. I cried every single day. I looked down at the photos. A chubby baby in a white crib. A silver rattle. A mother with a younger, softer face smiling down at a bundle of blankets. If I were 14, this scene would have broken me in half. If I were 16, would have wept with her. But I was 21. I had spent 16 years being raised by a woman who taught me how to read financial statements before I was 10, who sat by my bedside when I had pneumonia, who flew halfway across the world just to attend my middle school science fair. I felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow. Just a vast, cold expanse of indifference. You kept a nursery untouched for 5 years, I said, my voice quiet. And then? What happened, Julia? Julia's sobbing hitched. Then you adopted Oliver, I continued, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. And when the guilt became too heavy, you replaced the memory of the lost son with the convenient reality of a boy who flattered your ego. You spent 15 years pouring your love into a golden idol. He was just a child. Julia cried defensively. We had to move on. Moving on is fine, I said. What isn't fine is what you did when you finally found me. I stood up and walked over to where she knelt. I looked down at the album. When you found me, you didn't see a son who had survived. You saw a threat to Oliver's comfort. You saw an uncouth, rustic embarrassment who might disrupt your social calendar. You handed my medical file to a butler and didn't bother reading 2 pages to know that a spoonful of soup could kill me. I didn't know. Julia wept, clawing at the hem of my trousers. Kit, I swear on my life, I didn't know about the peanuts. Ollie said. Ollie said, I repeated, shaking my head. It's always what Ollie said. Edward stepped forward, his voice cracking with panic. Kit, whatever happened between you and your mother, whatever happened with Oliver, we are your blood. The Cleveland group is your birthright. If the Edwin group forecloses on our debt, 3 generations of our family's legacy will be erased. The banks are seizing the estate tomorrow. Are you truly going to stand there and watch your own flesh and blood be thrown onto the street? I looked at Edward. When you sent your driver to ambush me outside my university, I said, you didn't ask if I was happy. You didn't ask what I wanted to do with my life. You told me I had a duty to come home and serve as a placeholder so Oliver wouldn't feel guilty. I took a slow breath, stepping back, pulling my trousers out of Julia's desperate grasp. You built your legacy on vanity, Edward. Don't ask me to pay for its funeral. Christopher. Victoria's voice cut through the room. She had just entered through the double doors, flanked by security who were allowing her in only under Helena's silent orders. Victoria looked completely undone. Her tailored blazer was missing its buttons. Her hair was pulled back into a chaotic bun, and her face was devoid of its usual clinical superiority. Christopher, stop this, Victoria said, her chest heaving as she marched toward me. Do you have any idea what you've done? My firm is bankrupt. Dad is being sued by the shareholders. Ollie has locked himself in his room and is threatening to swallow pills. Is this what makes you happy? Ruining our lives. Just because we didn't give you enough attention? I looked at Victoria. She was still doing it. Even now, standing amid the wreckage of her entire life, her brain was wired to frame everything as my petty, emotional defect. Victoria, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. Did you know why the shoulder seam of that navy suit tore so easily? Victoria stopped, blinking in confusion. What? Oliver didn't have that suit altered to fit me, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket and tapping the screen twice. He had the tailor cut the internal stitching along the back and sleeves, leaving only a single basting thread to hold it together. I held the phone out to her. On the screen was an audio recording and a copy of an invoice from a bespoke boutique in the downtown fashion district. The tailor's voice played through the phone's speaker with crystal clarity. Mr. Oliver Cleveland specifically requested that we weaken the seams on the blue blazer so that it would split at the first sign of physical exertion. He paid an extra $2,000 in cash to ensure it looked like an accidental tear caused by poor sizing. Victoria's jaw dropped. She stared at the screen, her eyes dilating in sheer disbelief. He wanted me to split my jacket in the middle of Lord Bancroft's ballroom, I said. He wanted 80 of the most powerful people in the country to watch the country boy burst out of his clothes like an illiterate clown. And you stood in the foyer, telling me I was ungrateful for his kindness. Julia stopped crying. She looked up from the floor, staring at the phone, her face completely frozen. No. Ollie wouldn't, he wouldn't do that. Ollie did that, I said. Just like Ollie told the kitchen that I preferred extra rich peanut garnish in my broth, despite the lawyer's medical briefing. Your butler didn't forget, Julia. The butler was tipped $10,000 by Oliver to keep his mouth shut. I tapped the screen again, displaying the bank transfer record from Oliver's personal account to the head butler's offshore wallet. The silence in the room was absolute. The illusion was finally, completely dead. There was no misunderstanding. There was no fragile, innocent boy who felt guilty. There was only a spoiled, sociopathic parasite who had systematically poisoned the Cleveland family against their biological son from the very first second to protect his inheritance, and they had happily handed him the venom. Edward stumbled backward, crashing into a side table, sending a crystal vase shattering across the floor. He stared into space, his mouth hanging open, looking as though his entire soul had been ripped out through his chest. Julia let out a long, keening wail, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. She wasn't weeping for the money anymore. She was weeping because she finally realized what she had traded her real son for, a hollow, deceitful monster of her own creation. Now, I said, turning away from them and walking back to the sofa next to Catherine. You wanted to know if I would watch you be thrown onto the street. I picked up my coffee cup, taking a slow, quiet sip. I won't be watching. I have a midterm exam on Monday, and the weather is supposed to be quite nice for cycling. Security will show you out. The cleanup was handled with the cold, surgical precision that made the Edwin name feared across 3 continents. By Friday afternoon, the Cleveland group was officially placed into receivership. The Edwin syndicate acquired 70% of their debt for pennies on the dollar, immediately liquidating the company's non-core assets, including the massive country estate, the private fleet of luxury vehicles, and the ancestral art collection. Edward Cleveland was forced into early, disgraced retirement, facing 2 separate federal investigations for financial misrepresentation. Julia Cleveland suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was admitted to a private sanitarium upstate, funded, ironically, by a minor educational trust one had authorized through the Edwin legal team. It was the only money they would ever receive from me, enough for clean sheets, 3 meals a day, and absolute crushing silence. Victoria attempted to find employment with several Tier 1 consulting firms in New York and London. Every single application was rejected within minutes. The financial world is small, and no one was willing to hire a woman who had tried to bankrupt her own family's biological heir out of petty sibling rivalry. Last I heard, she had relocated to a small regional accounting firm in the Midwest, working 60-hour weeks under a different surname. And then there was Oliver. When the bank repossession team arrived at the Cleveland estate with the court order, they found Oliver sitting on the floor of his gaming suite, surrounded by designer clothes, frantically live streaming to an audience of 3,000 people who were doing nothing but spamming peanut and clown emojis in the chat. When the bailiffs began tagging his custom gaming rigs and luxury watches for auction, he threw a violent, hysterical tantrum, screaming that the estate belonged to him. The video of him being physically dragged down the grand marble staircase by 2 county sheriffs, sobbing and screaming that he had a weak heart, was viewed 50 million times in 48 hours. The Bancrofts didn't fare any better. Amelia's engagement prospects were permanently destroyed. The high society circles that once lauded her as an untouchable goddess closed their doors in her face. Her family was forced to sell 60% of their commercial portfolio to cover the legal liabilities arising from the New Harbor lease breach. 2 weeks after the gala, Amelia attempted to ambush me outside my university lecture hall. She wasn't wearing her designer silk blouses or diamonds. She wore a simple trench coat, her hair unwashed, dark circles carved deep into her pale face. "Kit," she said, stepping out from behind a row of oak trees as I unlocked my bicycle. "Please. Just 5 minutes." I didn't stop unlocking the chain. "You have 30 seconds, Ms. Bancroft. And that's only because I'm waiting for the traffic light to change." "I was lied to," she cried, her voice cracking with frantic desperation. "Oliver manipulated me. He told me you were abusive, that you threatened him, that you only wanted the family money. I was trying to protect him because I thought he was weak. If I had known the truth." "If you had known the truth," I said, standing up and wheeling my bicycle around, "you would have married the Edwin heir instead of the Cleveland pet." She froze, the words dying in her throat. "You didn't care about the truth, Amelia," I said calmly, looking her in the eye. "You cared about power. You liked having a weak, compliant little boy like Oliver wrapped around your finger, and you liked the idea of crushing someone. You thought was beneath you. You thought I was a harmless target. I stepped onto the pedal. Next time you pick a target, make sure you know who's holding the rifle. Have a good life, Ms. Bancroft. I rode away into the golden afternoon sunlight, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk, a relic of a game she had already lost. 6 months later. The early summer breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine and sea salt. Across the terrace of the North Coast estate. I sat at the outdoor mahogany table, working through a stack of venture capital proposals for sustainable agricultural tech, a sector Catherine had handed me full autonomy over. Across the table, Helena was casually throwing small pieces of artisan bread to a flock of seagulls gathering near the stone balustrade. My phone on the table buzzed with a text notification. It was from my university registrar. Congratulations, Kit Edwin. Your senior thesis has been accepted with highest honors. Commencement ceremony details to follow. I smiled, taking a slow sip of iced tea. Good news? Catherine asked, walking out onto the terrace carrying a freshly baked lemon tart. Thesis got accepted, I said. Graduation is next month. We'll need to book the private jet for the entire family, Helena remarked, without turning around. And make sure the university reserves the front too. Rose. Your mother cries when she's proud, and she needs legroom. I do not cry, Catherine said with mock severity, placing a slice of tart on my plate. I merely experience ocular condensation. I laughed out loud. From the garden below, a small gray and white kitten, rescued from the university campus 3 weeks ago, scrambled up the stone steps, leaped onto my lap, and curled up into a tight, purring ball of fur. I stroked its head, looking out over the endless blue of the Atlantic Ocean. There were no crystal chandeliers here. No tailored suits meant to disguise hollow souls. No games of social supremacy played over bowls of poisoned soup. There was only the quiet, immense weight of real power, the kind that didn't need to scream to be heard, and the kind of family that didn't need blood to be true. Kit. Catherine called gently, looking at me with a soft smile. Yeah, Mom? Are you happy you came home? I looked down at the kitten sleeping on my knee, then up at Catherine and Helena. I never left, I said.